Have you ever had a feeling that something bad was about to happen, and then it did? Not like you knew all the exact details of what would happen or when, but you just had an odd feeling of some kind of imminent danger? Like something was in the air that day that just felt different. And when it actually happened, you started to remember how it played out in your head. We call this déjà vu, but you might have unknowingly tapped into something called the collective unconscious. The human mind is famously hard to fully understand. Since we are the ones experiencing reality, we can't take a step back and properly analyze ourselves without indirectly influencing the outcome, since internal biases and pattern-seeking behaviors become common. This is precisely why there are so many theories concerning human behavior, because no one is able to pin it down exactly. The idea of the collective unconsciousness stems from the writings of Carl Jung, where he theorizes that each individual has both a conscious and an unconscious mind, working together for our own personal benefit. Your unconscious mind would be an area that is entirely closed off to your conscious thoughts, but deeply influences your everyday life, through dreams and other processes of the subconscious. Jung thought that if every person has an unconscious mind that is typically inaccessible to them, then perhaps these could be connected to a larger collective, the collective unconscious. He believed this was a shared resource pool of thoughts, emotions, and human behavior constants, composed of our inherited ancestral experiences, dating far back to ancient human beings. The constants of human behavior manifested themselves through Jung's archetypes, or universal symbols and motifs that are expressed through human experiences. He believed that the collective unconscious influences our thoughts, emotions, and behavior, appearing to us in mysterious ways, much like déjà vu or other meaningful coincidences. He called these synchronicities. These coincidences involve an inner psychological state found within a dream, closely aligning with an external physical event where something might play out exactly as it did in your dream. These events would have no real-world connection between them, but Jung observed them as meaningful occurrences of the unconscious mind. These ideas have found favor with some, especially compared to other schools of psychoanalytic study, but like any process of understanding the human mind, some people will always see things differently. It therefore becomes near impossible to prove any school of thought, as we are unable to quantify or study with real numbers or data points. But what if there was a way where we could actually measure levels of synchronicity? What if the collective unconsciousness was already influencing numerical analysis? The Global Consciousness Project believes we've been doing that for longer than we realize. The project originates at Princeton University from the Pear Research Lab in the mid to late 90s, studying what they call engineering anomalies. Among the highest level subjects were psychokinesis and remote viewing. They were described as focusing on the human capacity for remote perception, what a layman might call extrasensory perception, or ESP. This level of focus on the human psyche was deemed parapsychology and pseudoscience, leading Princeton to eventually sever ties with the lab. The director of the Global Consciousness Project while at Princeton was Roger D. Nelson, until he stepped back in 2002. His area of research centered on events that he deemed to be highly focused, highly emotional, and highly coherent. This means that everyone is thinking in a similar way. The experiment was this. Small computers would run random number generator scripts. These do exactly what you'd think, output streams of random numbers hundreds of times every second. These would be running in the background, so to say, while life went on as usual. While these machines were online, in 1997, Diana, the Princess of Wales, unexpectedly died. This widely covered, highly emotional event had somehow affected the random number generators. Statistically, you can analyze an output string of random numbers to see how truly random they really are. For example, from 1 to 10, you'd be unlikely to roll a 1 50 times in a row. For the death of Princess Diana, the numbers they observed were much higher than the expected values for the dataset. Higher deviations between the numbers signaled that at that time, people were less focused and highly emotional, or so they thought. The lab believed this was the case, as her death was shocking, unexpected, and tragic. The media coverage was overwhelming. It only cemented this event right in line with what the Pear Lab was studying. And then, 1 week later, Mother Teresa had passed away. The number generators were still running, so they had the chance to observe these values as well. Interestingly, the values they found were much lower than the expected dataset, nearly the opposite of what had happened just 1 week earlier. Roger D. Nelson and his team believed that this was the result of the media portrayal of the two events. On one hand, the sudden and mysterious death of a young woman would surely produce a highly emotional resonance, as they called it. On the other, the death of Mother Teresa would be an event that is more expected. As an elderly and charitable nun, she had lived as full of a life as anyone wished they could. The Pear Lab concluded that her memory would be well honored, without the profound level of grief of a life cut short as observed for the death of Princess Diana. The research done by the Pear Lab in the same study interpreted this data in that groups of people, especially when they are attuned and engaged by a common theme, may produce something like a consciousness field that can induce a small but statistically identifiable bias in a nominally random sequence. Meaning, when we are emotionally afflicted, or when everyone is on the same page, so to speak, it somehow affects our collective unconscious. Their findings of this conscious influence showed that the change in randomness was statistically significant. They had observed the data for the next several years, following and studying events you might expect: that year's Academy Awards, the 1998 FIFA World Cup, various church services and group psychotherapy sessions, as well as the morning of and the days following September 11, 2001. The GCP initially claimed that there was a noticeable change in the random output for the 2 days after 9/11. Given their previous study of the death of Princess Diana, it made logical sense that a highly covered, tragic, unexpected, and visceral event would have affected everyone's consciousness field like they had thought. This graph was published later that year, showing upticks in activity the same times as the strikes in the first and second tower, the attack on the Pentagon, and the subsequent collapse of the World Trade Center. The reason for the constant upward trend is explained in that, as more people are hearing about what's going on, they will turn on the news and become increasingly emotionally moved. They believe that these trends were unlikely to be pure chance, as seen in this chart overlaid with similar random data for a similar time period, showing that these other deviations between the numbers had almost no correlation with the events of that morning. So why did the data line up precisely with each attack, culminating in what appeared to be heightened emotional distress? Was it just a coincidence? Statisticians seem to agree that it was. Edwin May and James Spotswood independently concluded that there was not in actuality a statistically significant change in the measured randomness of the variables, which means that the outcome is more likely due to random chance than an outside effect, which would be our so-called consciousness field. The Pear analysis of global consciousness on 9/11 proved so controversial that more statisticians came out to try and disprove their methodology. As this was when the team was still with Princeton University, they began walking back their claims. As of today, the project is privately funded. Their webpage titled Formal Analysis, September 11, 2001, leads with a note stating, "These analyses and descriptions were written in 2001, adding that their poorly defined variance question can be much refined now," and ends with, quote, 9/11 was a powerful event, but even so, should not be taken by itself as proof of a global consciousness effect. That requires the patient accumulation of replications. Roger D. Nelson, the former coordinator of research at the Pear Lab, still directs the Global Consciousness Project from his home office in Princeton, New Jersey, despite retiring in 2002. Their website offers statistical analyses of contentious and highly publicized stories in American politics, including the death of George Floyd and the January 6th Capitol insurrection. These follow the same timeline structure as the 9/11 report. Their research is funded by the Institute of Noetic Sciences, who claimed in 2024 that unambiguously, people are able to mentally influence these systems of random number generators. Quote, "The analysis asked if focused intention could change the probabilistic structure of the outputs of the RNGs. The answer was a clear yes." End quote. Their most influential project is one you might have seen before, on forums and message boards. It's called the GCP dot, and it updates in real time with a color-coded dot on the screen, signaling the levels of variance produced by the RNG systems, called eggs. Low variance is indicated by shades of green and blue, indicating large amounts of internal group focus, like what you might expect at a church service or group meditation sessions. High levels of variance are indicated by shading from orange to red, and rarely hot pink. This would suggest an extreme emotional resonance, like what you might feel when it seems like everyone in the world just witnessed a tragic and distressing event on the news. Given what we know about the statistical significance of Roger Nelson's findings, I find it hard to believe that our unconscious minds are able to influence the output of a series of computer scripts. For Carl Jung, the conscious and unconscious minds must work together for the development of the self, to help us filter the signal from the noise, where I believe that these studies produce not nearly a strong enough signal. Human behavior includes the tendency to find patterns that aren't really there, to discover a connection that might be entirely unrelated. The term for this is called apophenia, where our minds, consciously or not, will set out to find definite patterns in random information. Fittingly, at the bottom of the page for the Global Consciousness dot, a simple quote in plain text encapsulates this entire experiment and the projection of our unconscious minds onto the noise, grasping at whatever we can for any sort of signal. Please, don't strongly interpret the dot.